Hey there. I wanted to give you a brief kind of inside look into the actual script writing process of The Chosen. By the time you watch this, I will have completed all 8 episodes. And when I say I mean completed my portion. I'm kind of the final step of the scripts. Ryan and Tyler do the first bulk of the work in the initial drafts after the three of us have put together our outline for what the show is going to be and what the episodes are going to be. And then I'm kind of the final stage. And so right now I'm in my final stage, and I've been working on the very opening scene of season 3. Now, you may be wondering why the opening scene, if you're this close to being done with all 8. Well, obviously we work on different things at different times, and there's some things that still need perfecting. And so I wanted to show you how the opening of season 3 actually transformed over time. And right now, I mean, this video it's on my phone. I don't even have a good microphone, so it sounds a little weird. I know that because it's later at night, I'm probably looking a little haggard. But I just wanted you to have kind of an insider peek at what happens kind of in real time over the course of the last year or so. So when I first get the first draft of the shooting script, meaning this is Ryan, so Tyler has done his version of the script, then he gets it to Ryan, and Ryan then gets it to me after Ryan has done his work on it. This is a version of the script that is very, very close. Now there are things that they just know I'm going to be fixing myself, things that I'm going to be tweaking or putting my own spin on it as the final kind of creative visionary of the story. But for the most part, Ryan is attempting to reflect as much as possible of what we've come up with. So he sent me this draft. Now, the opening of season 3, we had originally intended to open it with what we call a cold open, the teaser of an episode that's before the credits. And we had intended it to be focused on Joanna. Now, you know who Joanna is from the Bible. She worked in Herod's court. And so we were going to kind of develop a little bit of her backstory. And we ultimately ended up deciding not to do that. We wanted to connect Matthew to what Jesus was preaching at the Sermon on the Mount. So this is not a spoiler in the sense that you know that the opening of season 3 is going to pick up a little bit where season 2 left off, which is the sermon. But we wanted to accomplish a couple of things with Matthew. Number one, we wanted you to see a little bit more of his backstory, what came before the beginning of season 1. And one of the other things we wanted to do was to remind you of where Matthew's come from, because what we know of Matthew now is he seems almost like a sweetheart, and that the other disciples are pretty brutal to him, and we can't fully figure out why, because he seems so nice and in many ways a victim. And so we wanted to remind you, but also not just for the sake of reminding you, but for the sake of the story and the depth of the change that Matthew is going through, to show you what could have caused the decision that he made and the career path that he chose. So when I first got the script from Ryan, it was a flashback to Matthew as a teenager making the decision to become a tax collector. And the first time I read it, I immediately had a bit of an issue with it. So I'll show you just a sample. So this is not something we would normally ever do. And Ryan might even be upset at me right now, but this is the version that was originally drafted based on some of our comments. I'm not going to show you the whole thing, but here's a quick excerpt. So you can see here, Matthew is saying, it says across the table, Matthew cowers, and he's defending why he's choosing to be a tax collector, which was a horrible thing to do back then among the Jewish people. It's 10 times the salary I could ever, Alphaeus' dad, and 1,000 times the betrayal. Just by doing the math, I can assure us a better future. Future, you short-sighted mental defective. I'm talking about our faith. Matthew, maybe I don't enjoy going to bed hungry. Alphaeus slaps the rest of that sentence out of Matthew's mouth. All right. So, considering what our goals are in showing you Matthew's backstory, what's the main issue with that? Well, obviously, it makes Matthew even more of a victim. I mean, his father is calling him horrible words, and he actually slaps him in the face. And the scene actually gets even more brutal. And just to be very clear, Ryan and Tyler, especially in those early stages, I encourage them, in fact, ask them to go for the jugular, to really pursue and push the boundaries and push the envelope as much as possible, because I can always bring things back. So I never want them to hold back on anything. So this isn't at all, I mean, the three of us do everything in lockstep and we agree on everything. But so by showing you that early stage, I think that's actually really good writing. It's a really good scene. It's just not accomplishing what we wanted to accomplish. And I also don't think it's fair to our characters to show Matthew once again, even in his decision making to do something so brutal, to be a victim. And so I ended up rewriting the scene and shifting things around so that the opening of season 3 is actually not Matthew making the decision to become a tax collector. He's actually already a tax collector. And what is he doing? He's actually going to Alphaeus's house and collecting taxes from his own father. And that's ultimately even worse than just the decision to be a tax collector. He's actually tax collecting his father. Well, Matthew doesn't want to be too brutal personally. In fact, he doesn't even want his father to know. So he sends a Roman in his place. And the scene that I wrote, I had the Roman kind of being tough on Alphaeus. And then Matthew gets frustrated and steps in as he's listening to this exchange, and he steps in and he ends up saying, Father, like, please, get your, you're late and you need to get your tribute done. And they end up arguing. And one of the things that Ryan pointed out about my version was, he said, I don't want Matthew to necessarily be a victim, but he also can't be someone who is so heartless towards his father that he lets this Roman soldier treat his father with such disdain and dismissiveness. We've all had encounters with the law. I happen to come from a family of police officers, and I love law enforcement for the most part. And yet we've all had those moments where we're in a formal situation, whether it's jail or an encounter with law enforcement, or we've had a family member who's encountered the court system, and sometimes it just feels so dehumanizing. They just don't seem to speak our language. And here we are, with a Roman who doesn't actually speak the language, but he's in the process of our show. Of course, they speak English, but he's being so kind of formal and clinical. And Ryan thought, I don't think Matthew would allow for that level of dismissiveness. So let's have Matthew step in, but maybe Matthew's doing it to kind of protect his father from what could be a brutal encounter. Like, this Roman could potentially just decide he's going to beat the crap out of Matthew's father, and we're not going to let Matthew allow that to happen. So Ryan pushed back and was saying, let's give Matthew a little bit more agency, and he steps in for the reason of protecting his father, and that, in his attempt to protect his father, reveals that he's actually his own father's tax collector, and that inflames the situation, but Matthew's at least trying to find a middle ground here. So I agreed with that. And so we found this middle ground where Matthew is considerate to a point, but ultimately is making a decision that is brutal against his own father. And in their exchange, this is where then I took over and I started really going back and forth, showing them going back and forth, Matthew and his father, in deciding, Matthew kind of getting annoyed. Like, at some point going, you know what, I'm trying to help you. I'm trying to make things easier for you. And here you are still angry at me for making this choice. And they end up, that's when the divorce happens. The official family divorce between Alphaeus and his son. And so it just was more nuanced that way, yet still communicated what we wanted to communicate. So here's a bit of a spoiler alert. This is a scene that you haven't seen yet. So if you don't want to know anything, hopefully you've maybe turned off this video earlier. But here's a little bit of a glimpse. So I'll pull up this version. So now this is the opening of season 3. It's Alphaeus's humble home from a different era, right? The street is active but not frantic. It's 24 AD, so it's 6 years earlier from the time that we're in. And we do have a Roman escort come to the home of Alphaeus, and we see them have an exchange. And I don't want to show you much more, but I'm just giving you an illustration of the back and forth that happens in our writing process and our attempt to really accurately capture not only what we think would have happened, but to also express our characters' lives and heart and motivation in a way that truly sets up what we intend to happen later. And of course, I'm not going to share that with you, but we really want to work our way backwards as what would have caused Matthew and his father to be so misaligned, and what would have caused people to be so angry at Matthew. There are reasons, and a lot of them are his fault, and we want to show you that. And this is the kind of back and forth that we go into once we start writing drafts of the script. And I just thought you'd appreciate that little insight, and I hope you're going to end up enjoying the scene where it lands at the opening of season 3.